Welcome to Inner Voice program. I'm Dr. Zeine, psychologist and psychotherapist and a marriage and family therapist. And this show is about psychological and societal issues, which we talk about human sexuality for the past couple of months. I talked with experts, and today I'm very, very lucky and glad that one of old friends, I found him and he said yes to me. He's an author, he's a psychologist, Dr. Sam Alibrando. He has his office in Pasadena, and he specializes in individual couples, their marital conflict, and especially their sexuality, their relationship with each other, and the issues of sexuality and adultery and sexual addiction. He's the author of Follow the Yellow Brick Road, and it is how to change for the better when life gives you its worst. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here. It's been a long time since we've seen each other.
Yes, it's great to have this opportunity.
And you don't look a day older than when I first saw you, or last saw you.
I like it already. I think the show is going great already. So, I know that you've worked many, many years with couples, and your expertise has been human sexuality, and you've worked with many couples. And I know that many couples who have come to me who needed special work in their sexuality, and or there was, for example, a male in part of the couple who was not comfortable talking to me about their sexuality, I've always referred them to you, and they've always bragged about how you were. So I thought it would be an amazing opportunity to have you come in and talk to our audience about your experience when in a couplehood there is some sort of an addiction, and what is the distinct difference between the addiction among females or male, and what is the distinction between adultery and addiction?
You're scratching the surface on the complexity. If someone's addicted to heroin, it's pretty straight up. They're addicted to heroin. When it comes to sexuality, it's way complex because there's differences often and not always between the genders, and then there's all different types within. For example, when is it an addiction and when is it an affair? And so it can get pretty complicated. I like to think of a spectrum of sorts. When it's an addiction, there's some gray areas and there's some black and white. For example, most psychologists these days would say it's fairly normal for males and some females to masturbate, for example. There may be some religious, moral-based difference with that. So that practice within most consensus can be a normal part of sexuality, for example. Like I said, there are some more religious people who look at it as a wrong thing, and that's more of a moral and a discipline at that point, a spiritual practice, if you may, of not masturbating. And then you have, on the other side of the spectrum, someone who spends 6 to 8 hours a day masturbating in front of pornography. And they can't work because of it. They get fired all the time because they can't stop using the internet at work. And on that end, it's pretty obvious too. And then you have all the gray areas.
In the middle.
In the middle. And so one question is, on the extreme is what we would call compulsive, what we would call addiction. In the first step, in the 12-step, they say you're powerless and unmanageable. That would be the criteria for an addiction, that you're powerless to this behavior and is unmanageable, meaning it normally will get you in trouble in some form or fashion.
Well, many couples, as I've understood, especially for the male part, watching pornography at times and masturbating with pornography at times, to them it appears to be the norm, and then sometimes they have conflict with their spouse and with their wife, saying that the wife says, okay, maybe I can handle watching pornography together as a means to get us both excited, or once in a while I could see that if he needs to masturbate and he can look at pornography. But to me, even if they're, watching pornography, it feels like an affair to me, because they're looking at another woman and then thinking, I should be the other woman. So what do you do in that case?
That's where the complexity comes in, because there's as interesting as it might be most of the cases is going to be male side.
Right.
There are female sex addicts, but not many. Most of them are sex and love addicts, as opposed to just sex. Yeah, right. Because we're just kind of built differently. Men are way more visual, and women are more responsive relationally. So as interesting as it might be, the male side of it, the partner side is even more complex, because there's a whole spectrum of responses from the partner. Anywhere from boys will be boys to, if you look at a woman, if you turn your head and look at a woman, I'm calling the divorce lawyer. I literally worked with a couple where he looked at a Playboy magazine and she literally called the divorce lawyer and set divorce proceedings because she was so reactive to that. And on that side of the formula, it's really interesting because it's very, very value-laden, very, very subjective. And what does that mean to the woman? For a lot of times, like you said, it feels like cheating on them. And others, they look at, as long as you only sleep with me, they know. And the other point that is part of this formula is differing sexual appetites. Most of the time, the male has more of a sexual appetite than the female. That's not always the case. I work with some couples where the female wants it a lot more than the male wants it. So it's a negotiation, really, between two people who are in a partnership, and what that means.
And when you find and finally diagnose that one of the partners does have an addiction, so they will also accept that it's not just the norm, or it's not that they can stop. And one of the ways that sometimes we look at checking out whether it is an addiction or not is to have a request for them to stop it for a while and see what happens.
Exactly.
And if their reaction is fine, and they actually go through it and see that there's no physical reaction or tolerance reaction or constantly craving for it and all of those signs of addiction, and they can incorporate it within their life, then it's a matter of adjusting these times together and the appetite together and all that they need to do. But what if after this type of an exercise, the person tries not to do it, but then finally they get it, that, all right, I'm addicted, I'm caught and into this, and then what do we do with the couple?
Good question. That would be in the place where they cannot not do it, right? So we establish now that this person has a compulsive, if you may, addictive behavior. And what we know about the brain, if we have time, we could talk later about how the brain has a certain set point and then creates the cravings, okay? So the person is at that place, but then we have a relational issue at this point. I think that has to be, I don't think there are any clear rules. Again, I think that's a negotiation between the two people. And to what extent is it really activating an insecurity in this case, the female, about her own self as a sexual person, her own view of herself physically, and if she's attractive or not, and her own taking it personal is another factor that has to be played out in terms of that negotiation between the two of them. And along with a concurrent respect for the man towards her feelings and her needs. So very often that's hard to do without some kind of intervention. And I don't think you get that from a book. I think you have to see a therapist, preferably who has a specialization in that area, just to help them unpack it and repack it. And then in this case, the male sex addict also getting involved in some kind of program for addiction. And there's many out there. The most common, of course, is going to be the 12-step program that helps men who are caught in the throes of that kind of behavior.
When you say unpack it and repack it, say more about that. What do you mean?
Okay, so they're sitting there and they come in, hopefully they're coming in. If they may have this discussion at home, and if they can have a productive discussion at home with this very hot, emotionally charged topic, God bless them. But if they're in the office, we're looking at things like, what does it mean that he cannot not do this? What does she feel about that? Is her concern that in terms of how it affects their relationship and how it affects their sexual relationship, or is it also she's taking it personal, that it's triggering in her some deep insecurity? So we want to talk about her insecurity at that point, and that to kind of have her, the big word, as we know in family therapy, is differentiation, and to help build some differentiation between his behavior and her reaction to his behavior, so that she can at the same time deal with her insecurity while at the same time negotiate something that they can both live with as a couple.
Now, when the addiction appears to be only with pornography and masturbation, there's a different impact that it actually leaves with the relationship and the spouse than when it is actually sexuality with another person, that they are having the sexual interaction, whether it's intercourse or just interaction, and or if it's even just playing and flirting, but there's this desire that I constantly need to get an attention from the outside and play in this game of the hunting and catching. This completely has a different impact, because now it takes another person into account, it takes the society into account, it takes the fear of losing the person into account, so it completely creates another dynamic.
I agree. There are some people in the 12-step program saying addiction's addiction. And I'm going, okay, maybe dynamically they may be right. But in terms of its truest impact on the relationship, I see a distinction that you just described. The one is like you're almost using the pornography and the masturbation combination as a mood altering. And it is mood altering. People say, how could sex be an addiction? Only substances can be an addiction. There's two ways of looking at that. One is ingesting substances. The other is changing biochemistry. And sexuality changes biochemistry.
It's the highest of the high.
Yeah. It's I remember studying this in grad school, and the three major drug groups, right, are stimulants like amphetamines, barbiturates like alcohol, and then hallucinogens. And I'm saying in sex you get all three. You get the stimulant because it activates arousal. You get hallucinogens because it's a fantasy. You think the prostitute really likes you. I mean, they're doing their job, but you, in your mind, you think they really like you. And then orgasm activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is probably they say it's as close to heroin as you can get in terms of its activation. So it can be highly addictive in terms of, especially for people who didn't have an early good attachment with the mother object or the mother person, whether that was the mother, nanny, dad, an aunt, grandma, but had a really healthy, ongoing, loving, good attachment. We know now that affects the different nerve systems in the brain, and they get compromised. And then later on in life, we look for ways to stimulate those parts of the brain. And so it can be very addictive. And I forgot your question.
Wait, I'll tell you in a minute. However, let's go and watch some of the businesses that are sponsoring us, and then we'll be right back.
آژانس مسافرتی فراز عرضه کننده بهترین سرویس با ارزانترین قیمت‌ها برای مسافرت به همه نقاط دنیا. فراز ترافل مشاور دلسوز شما در امور مسافرتی. تلفن 818 388 1983 و 951 929 97 50 faraztravel.com. با فراز ترافل با آسایش بر فراز آسمان ها پرواز کنید.
آرتروز، میگرن، بیماری‌های قلبی، نازایی شما را آزار می‌دهد؟ نگران اضافه وزن خود هستید؟ دکتر نسیم ضیایی متخصص نچروپت با دانش و تجربه کافی بیماران خود را درمان می‌کند. روش‌های معالجه دکتر نسیم ضیایی کاملاً طبیعی و مؤثر میباشد. اکثر خدمات کلینیک درمانی دکتر نسیم ضیایی توسط بیمه‌های خصوصی پوشش داده می‌شود.
من دکتر نسیم ضیایی، دکترای نچروپاتیک مدیسن هستم. نچروپاتیک مدیسن میتونه برای تمامی شما عزیزان با هر گونه بیماری جسمی، روحی و روانی مؤثر واقع بشه. شما میتونید با مطب ما تماس بگیرید و از 15 دقیقه مشاوره رایگان که ما برای هموطنان عزیز در نظر گرفتیم بهره مند بشید.
نشانی کلینیک درمانی دکتر نسیم ضیایی 3300 خیابان یانگ، یونیت 300. تلفن تماس 647 748 748 2.
مرکز آموزش آریان به مدیریت مهندس سوسن فتحیه با بیش از 20 سال سابقه درخشان تدریس در ایران و امریکا با افتخار خدمات آموزشی و پرورشی خود را به اطلاع می‌رساند. تدریس خصوصی و گروهی کلی دروس در سطوح ابتدایی تا دانشگاه به ویژه ریاضیات، انگلیسی و حسابداری. آماده سازی دانشپژوهان برای گذراندن تست‌های گوناگون به ویژه توفل، ISEE، HSPT، GED، SAT، ACT، GRE، GMAT، LSAT، MCAT و AutoCAD. تدریس زبان‌های خارجی به ویژه فارسی، اسپانیولی، فرانسوی و آلمانی. دوره‌های کوتاه مدت کامپیوتر و سایر خدمات آموزشی همه در یک نام، مرکز آموزش آریان. در ضمن تمامی خدمات فوق در مرکز آموزش آریان یا در منزل شما و همچنین از طریق اسکایپ قابل ارائه می باشد. برای اطلاعات بیشتر با شماره تلفن 818 808 2680 تماس حاصل فرمایید یا از وبسایت ما به آدرس www.aryaneducationcenter.com دیدن فرمایید. مرکز آموزش آریان، بی‌رقیب در عرصه آموزش.
خرد زندگی، مجموعه‌ای از سیدی‌های صوتی که شما رو به اعماق وجود خودتون میبره تا آرامش درون، خواب آسوده، رهایی از احساساتی که شما رو آزار میده و با بدن خودتون متصل میکنه به زبان فارسی و انگلیسی. این مجموعه با صدای دکتر فوژان زینی شما رو هیپنوتیزم میکنه و کلمات تلقینی به کار رفته میشه تا شما رو سریعتر به اهداف خودتون برسونه، با موسیقی که به شما آرامش میده و با تکنیک مانورو بیت. برای سفارش این سیدی های صوتی با دکتر فوژان زینی در تارنمای foojan.com تماس بگیرید و یا با شماره تلفن 818 648 2140 818 648 2140.
I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine. I'm a psychotherapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, speaker, and an author. I would like to tell you about a seminar, The Power of Two, that I'm doing with Behnam Bakhshande, which is a wonderful coach and a relationship and a business coach. This seminar is about you in your relationship, the most important aspect of your life, your intimate relationship. In this seminar, you will get how you have been behaving, how you have been thinking, your belief system, and your behaviors within your intimate relationship that has created the result that you have gotten right now. And will give you a lot of tools, amazing keys in how to create a successful relationship and how to sustain and maintain it. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome back to Inner Voice program. I'm here with Dr. Sam Alibrando, psychologist and an author, and we're talking about sexuality among couples, and especially if One of them is addicted to sexuality, whether it's pornography or different kinds of sexuality. The question that I was asking had to do with the difference between where sexuality is only with pornography or it's also with other people, and also the distinction where the addiction shifts into adultery, and is it just an adultery or is it an addiction?
Yeah, there's different types of, when you move away from the self-stimulation, pornography, that kind of stuff, then you move into the people realm, there's different types. Mm-hmm. There's one which would be anonymous, where you don't really care. In fact, you prefer not to know anything about the other person. Sometimes that's paid for, and sometimes that's pickups. But the goal there is just to have sex with someone, and preferably not someone who you have a relationship with. And those things have different formats too. You have the massage, which is kind of almost a massage and almost sex, and then you have out and out prostitution. Then you have the ones that are legal and ones that aren't legal. You have the ones that are based on sensuality and ones that are based on the person just wants someone to respond to them. That would be the first person that you were referring to earlier, who is a flirt and gets women to like them, or the gal who wants to see if men will take an interest in her. And that's more of an early kind of almost immature need for people to like you in some way. And so then you have
your identity that way.
Yeah,
and if
exactly.
You don't get, so it's more of the identity addiction, because if I don't get that way of somebody looking at me, especially in a way that they're attracted to me,
yes,
then I don't know who I am, as if I don't exist.
And you don't exist until that happens, and you live for then it wears off after a while, then you have to do it again to keep that person. And then you have the ones where they actually become relationships. I've worked with a couple different men who were married for not just years but decades. And for most of that time, they would have a relationship with their spouse. Sometimes in one relationship, actually it would look like a great relationship, and then he would have a number of affairs going on. And this one gentleman had 5 or 6 women at any given time. And he would visit them whenever he would travel. And so he had real relationships with them. There was no money exchanged. There was gifts, perhaps. And he would concurrently do that while at the same time having a marriage. And like I said, the one that you would look at, you would say they had a great marriage. She would even say that they had a great marriage.
So the marriage actually fulfilled a function in a relational base, and each of the other relationships also created and fulfilled their own function. And in that way, he had multiple relationships continuing and going on, and nobody was letting go. It's like everybody kind of agreed without the wife knowing.
Pretty much. Okay. Pretty much, yeah. And you've heard the phrase Madonna whore. Mm-hmm. It's the wife becomes the mother and the partner, and they raise children together. And then the whore is the stimulant, is the one that is the exciting person. And sometimes they can coexist in these cases, for decades. Mm-hmm. It brings up an issue which I have that I believe there's another piece besides addiction that can be in play, and it's what I call the alpha male. Mm-hmm. For as long as we've known humanity, the king always had a harem. There's something about thinking yourself bigger and better than other people and in a position of power that now all of a sudden you have this idea that you should and could have other women kind of flowing in and out of your life. President Kennedy, Bill Clinton had those kind of issues, and you'll see that with a lot of times with people of power.
And you said alpha male. We're having women become powerful, and I think the medium of women's income has actually risen in the United States these past couple of years. We don't see the same trend. We do see this trend of, okay, the cougar concept coming, but that's a different concept. Yeah. It's not an adultery, or it's not to actually have a male harem. It's more of I'm still young, I'm still beautiful, I'm still
Yes.
sexually active, and I can have the hot 20-year-old male who's also at their peak. That's a whole different concept. We don't see the same thing as women are coming into power.
I haven't, and I'm thinking right on the spot that there may be an evolutionary piece to that, where the male, especially the one in charge of that particular tribe, spreads his seed. So like, you'll see that in primates with gorillas, for example, that the one who wins the top is the one who gets to spread the seed. And I wonder if that's kind of ingrained somehow in our psyche. That's an interesting question.
So as you work with couples, and couples who are together, they're both professional, and part of the game of having a great relationship is to support each other into growing in power, in finances, in the freedom that they will have in their career, in their businesses. So with what we just talked about, have you seen fear among women who come into a relationship, and somehow if they are supporting their man to go up, they're side by side, having this fear, which, you know, by looking at what the biology is, that they're also supporting them finally to go through the place of, okay, now I want a harem because now I'm big and powerful.
Yeah, that would be a problem, wouldn't it? I think that there's something else going on that's more important, and that would be the level of narcissism. So if you have a man who is really mature and is not diagnosably narcissistic, I think that mutual support is only all positive. And I know many more men who go on business trips and have no interest in having an affair. They may turn their head, but I think it really, at this point, has to do with the degree of narcissism that the person has. And no matter how powerful they become, if their narcissism is there, they're going to be prone to wander anyway.
Say a little bit about narcissism for our audience so that they know what you mean when you use the word.
Okay.
And I say this because I think that the conversation about mental health has become so much on at least our public TV and radios, that sometimes people hear these words and they have their own version of what all of these mean and say it with not necessarily knowing what, if from a clinical perspective, we mean. So if you could open it up. No,
again, narcissism is, first of all, I want to say, a truly and deeply narcissistic person does not like themselves. That's the most important thing. They look like they like themselves. They look confident, but deep down inside they feel very fragile. And so what they do, one person said you have a fragile sense of yourself, and it's covered by a what we call a grandiose sense of ourself, an ideal sense of ourself, an image we want to portray, and we have to constantly portray to the world. And normally we can keep those bad feelings hidden. They come out at times. You'll see it, for example, if that person gets served divorce papers or they get fired, then those bad feelings will come out until they can get them back in again. So the number one thing I think...
They'll come out in rage.
And it'll come out in rage, and sometimes they'll get uncharacteristically immature and depressed. But often it comes out, and primarily comes out as rage, because they're so threatened. They often cannot take criticism. If you give them some feedback, they will often get offended. They feel very entitled, is another, a third tell for narcissism, is feelings of entitlement. Somehow they have special privileges that maybe they wouldn't afford to somebody else. And they don't like to deal with other people's pain. Narcissistic parents, and I really am fascinated by narcissistic mothers, they do not like to take care of their children when they get sick. Or they don't play very well. They're not apt to get on the floor with their 3-year-old and play dollies.
There's also, I want to add to this, there's also not only developmental narcissistic issues that you explained. Same symptomology, but I think there's also cultural narcissism that we have with a lot of the fully patriarchal systems that are given to men, because the one you were talking about, the mental health conversation, is not gender biased. It could, we could have female and we could have male who are narcissistic. But there are cultures who specifically, because of the upbringing and the way that they give more to a male, let's say, the mothers, the fathers, the whole society gives more to the male or holds a specific kind of expectation toward the male, also feeds this level of narcissism of you have to be grand, you have to be amazing, everybody has to serve you, you're entitled, you should be entitled to everything that there is.
I'm working with a man who is from India, and his mother did that very thing, kind of cut him aside from the rest of the kids and ordained him to be the gifted one, the wonderful one. And he's constantly suffering under that identification. And he always feels competitive with other men who are successful.
Especially, I think, because of our audiences are also the Iranian community. We also see that a lot in the Iranian community, where also the culture and the laws and the religious laws and all of that has allowed this concept of that the female is they're owned in many ways, and they're less than the male component. And so we have that literally embedded in the culture. Although many of the young Iranians who are living abroad are coming out and getting, the other aspects of the equality in the Western world within their system and their development and how they're growing up. But I think that we can't take away what we know about the many years of that culture being embedded. So it's also this distinctive concept of the narcissism, as we're talking about, where many times in some cultures, when you're having an affair, when the male is having an affair, and their buddies know about it, it's almost like it's almost
a badge.
It's not only, it's a badge. It's almost, remember about at the high school, all the guys are supposed to go score and tell their buddies that they've scored, whether they did or not, but they still need to say it. So you might have that continue even in adulthood, and then it becomes a normal concept, as it's supposed to be. We're supposed to have an affair. We're supposed to, look at porn or go with the prostitute or go on trips and male trips and just, have one-night stands or whatever it is. What do you think about that? Have you had come across
I think that's so true. I think every culture has its own iterations of that. There are some cultures that are more, if we have a chance to talk about my book, there'll be more cultures that are more Tin Man driven, where they're very subservient and very shame oriented, and there's other cultures that are very much more macho or narcissistic oriented, and there's that double standard that goes on, and it gets embedded into the culture and passed on down generations.
This is the second publishing of your book, right?
Yes.
This is the second, Follow the Yellow Brick Road. I know that the first time you had written it and I read it, and it was, it's one of those books that you read and you're like, really. It's like what we know, and you've brought it into words and put it elaborately, and you've rewritten the book a bit.
A bit.
Okay, so say more about your book.
Well, I think the book started out as another concept that I've been working on for most of my career. And there's a woman that said there's three ways we move. We either move toward people, we move away from people, or we move against people. And when I heard that, I couldn't think of many exceptions other than perhaps blends of those three. As I did more research, I found other people had similar ideas but called it different things. And then I came to conclusion I called the interpersonal triangle. And one day I realized, I go, wait a minute, Dorothy's three companions represent the three movements.
Wizard of Oz.
In the Wizard of Oz, in the book. And Dorothy had, as you may or may not know the story, she goes to this strange land. And in this strange land, she meets three people who end up becoming companions. The first is a scarecrow. And the scarecrow wanted a brain. And then she met a tin man who wanted a heart, and then a lion who needed courage. I said, wait a minute, that's all three of them. The courage is moving against, the heart, love, moving toward, and the tin man wanted a brain that was knowing or moving away. And I began to see in this story that Dorothy's, one of her main jobs in this Wizard of Oz mythology was to bring those three parts of herself and mature those three parts of herself. And I said, what else about the Wizard of Oz? And I came up with 5 things. And I think what your experience is pretty common. And one of the reasons is that the Wizard of Oz, the story, I think, is so compelling as a story. And it has passed the test of time as a true American folklore or true American mythology. And that's why we remember it, because we identify with those characters so strongly.
And when you see, because we were talking about affairs and we were talking about the relationship between people, how do you see this triangle working out when one person in the relationship is either in an affair or in addiction with sexuality? Well,
what I would say primarily is I'll call on one of the other principles in there, and that's the principle of the wizard. The wizard was, when Dorothy arrived in Oz, she was desperate because she's in this strange land. She didn't know what to do. So she sets off in this journey to look for a wizard. A wizard was going to save the day. And we all have wizards. When we're little, the wizards, depending on what culture you're in American culture, it's Santa Claus. And I'm sure in other cultures there are other imageries that we have. As adults, we have wizards. If only my husband or my wife was better, then I'd be happy. Or if I was richer, if I was skinnier, if I had a nicer car, or if only my boss would, and all those things we think are going to make us happy instead of our own taking personal responsibility. Well, any addiction is a wizard. Whether it's pornography becomes a wizard for someone who's addicted to pornography, getting that smile back from a female or a male, it can become our wizard, and we keep going for the wizard, but the wizard never gives us what we think it's going to give us.
And when you deal with the wizard in that way, and for example, the person accepts that what they're doing to themselves is playing along or wishing for the wizard, and it has nothing to do with reality. How do we bring them back? And what element of your book does it talk about, or we can actually attach it to, where it can bring back the form of the relationship together, since they acknowledge, okay, this is only a wizard and I can't do much with it?
Yeah. I think the first and most important thing is to see the wizard as just a wizard. That's the number one piece, is that the first is to acknowledge that. The distinction
between the fantasy and the reality.
Yeah, and because we think it's really true. And there's always some truth in it. That's the tricky thing, because it is nice if your husband or your wife is in fact acting kindly or loving to you, but if you think that's going to make you internally happy, that's the wizard then. So the first thing is accepting it, and the second thing is grieving, because whenever we give up a wizard, there's always going to be grieving. But the good thing about grieving is it leaves us stronger on the other end.
And I think part of the process, as you said, the grieving, sometimes it's very hard for people, and sometimes they think that if I'm supposed to give up something, I shouldn't. If it's the right thing to give up, then because I'm going toward the right concept in my life, then I should be happier, then I should not have any sadness. And the minute they go through the grief, they actually think, oh my God, then
must be something wrong.
Must be something wrong. Yeah. And they go back in the process of taking on the wizard as a bargaining concept, as if it's a part of the bargaining aspect of the grief process. And you said it beautifully, is that the grief is supposed to be there. We've got to go through the process.
You embrace the grief, understanding that grieving is part of being a full human being. Part of our life is realizing that we have limits and we have losses. And so the person who can live with limits and live with losses and knows and is familiar with grieving process and isn't afraid of it and in fact can embrace it, they become the people who are internally very strong, and then they have a capacity to be happy. And there's a lot of spiritual wisdom through the ages, both in Judaism and Christianity, in Islam and in Buddhism, for example. All of those great religions have ideas about how to, what we call in the business, authentic suffering, where you can embrace the grieving rather than hide from it and run away from it.
And then, real quick, where does it go from grieving? So first is reality check. This is reality, this is fantasy. Then we grieve about the fantasy that's there, and then?
After that is, in the grieving process, is acceptance. So there is a mature acceptance, and then there'll be, the third thing is going to be a replacement with things that are in our jurisdiction, and developing an attitude of gratitude, that we are happy with who we are and what we have, with some healthy ambition, right? We all, both of us, we know about striving, but we do it in a whole different attitude.
Right. And with reality-based concepts.
Reality-based.
And that I have, and knowing what I can control and what I can't, and moving toward a healthy life.
Yeah. Talk about culture, right? There's an American idea that you can be anything you want to be. That's baloney. I could never play for the Lakers. I'm too short. I'm not fast enough. We can be who we are. That's
the best of who we are.
Yes, exactly.
Not just somebody else, but the best of who we are.
Yep.
It's great to have you. It's great to see you after all these years, and with the new book, which is the same book but rewritten, Follow the Yellow Brick Road, How to Change for the Better When Life Gives You Its Worst. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. Hopefully you'll accept more of this invitation and you'll join us in different programs and in the different topics. Thank you for being with us until another week. Thank you and goodbye.